Hello, it's Trent Clark, your host. Welcome to the Winners Find a Way show. I'm super excited to have my good buddy, Dr. Danny Brassell. How are you, Dr. Danny?
Fantastic. How you doing, Trent?
Oh man, I couldn't be better. I mean, just hanging out, Dr. Danny, talking some shop. Literally, I love these conversations. Like people do podcasts, but man, I walk away with 7 nuggets every time trying to help my business and everything else. So it is fabulous to spend some time. I mean, a man of your education, you have just seen some things, and it's some crazy experiences. So I'm dying to get into that today. And let's talk. A first thing, Dr. Dan, tell them where they can find you.
Well, if you just go to dannybrassell.com, my last name is really easy to remember how to spell. It's spelled like Brassell. No, I never took any grief over that as a child.
Yeah.
Different things.
that was an easy elementary last name right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I dealt with the Clark Bar, and then I also dealt with the Clark Trent. Oh, Superman. I'm like, that is Clark Kent, right? And they were like, I had teachers call me Clark the whole first semester of school for years. So, all right. So you're literally one of America's leading reading ambassadors, which, man, I really have a passion for this. And I got to tell you, Dr. Danny, didn't love it at all when I was a kid, man. It was not my go-to.
I was right there with you, Trent. My father was a librarian, and I grew up hating reading. I always hated the public library. It always smelled funny to me. The furniture was always uncomfortable. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always a freaky homeless guy who thinks he's a vampire hanging out at the library. And it wasn't until I actually started teaching in the inner city in South Central Los Angeles where I saw a lot of my students didn't have the advantages I had growing up. And I said, shame on me. I mean, I was blessed. Both of my parents were in the home. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read in front of us kids. They read to us kids. And we always had plenty of access to wonderful reading materials. And now that I go all over the world working with leaders in various fields, I always encourage reading as one of the most relaxing and important things that any effective leader can do.
Yeah, it's so important. And I hadn't really thought about how much I value it now. And if you'd have told me when I was 12, 13 years old, running the streets until the streetlights came on, I mean, basketball, football, hockey, baseball, tennis, you name it, I was out there. Stop and read a book. What are you talking about? I would have rather had be grounded for 2 weeks than that. It was so funny how now in this life, I am a absolute hyper learner. I am all about reading, learning, and of course, I get the privilege and the blessing of being online with these brilliant minds like yours, and it's just incredible getting an opportunity to spend time. So super excited about today.
Cool.
All right. American University, sociology journalist. Then you go out to Cal State for a master's. Then you get doctorate in education from USC. Go Trojans. Pretty awesome. And so you now you grew up on the east side?
I grew up all over the place. My father kept on changing jobs. I basically say we were in the witness protection program. I was born in New York. Then I lived in San Diego. Then we lived in a small town in Iowa, and then we lived in a big town in Iowa, and then we moved to Colorado. And my parents decided they didn't want my brother and sister to turn out like me, so they stayed in Colorado, and I went to my undergrad in Washington, D.C., studied in Spain, went to teach in Houston, Texas. I thought I was going to live the rest of my life in Los Angeles, but then my wife decided about 5 years ago to move us out to Colorado, so I'm pretty open to any new experience.
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask you about something like that because, man, I meet a lot of people who are like, hey, I grew up here and I'm going to stay and live here my entire life. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's cool. That's awesome. This is where my family's at. But you have gone through, that is a plethora of different cultures. And I don't think Europeans always understand, hey, they get that Czechoslovakia is very different from Spain, different from Italy, different from England. But, the United States isn't much different, right? We have very different demographics and dialects from wherever you're at and culturally things going on. I mean, New Orleans is one of those great cultures that you go into. It's so different than everything else. And by the way, in the same turn, and I don't think people think of this as great, but Iowa is a fabulous culture. Like, this is about family and values and hard work, and education's important, but work comes almost, well, God comes first, and then it's maybe work, like
Yeah.
it's a very different, and the Bible Belt of America. Walk me through a little bit some of those real lessons you got on your journey through these cultures.
Well, I love that, Trent. I mean, if I were president, I'd give everybody 10 grand to travel the country, because I've been to the most conservative, the most liberal parts of America. And I always tell people, America's not Fox News or MSNBC. Most Americans, they want five things. They want a job. They want good schools for their kids. They want to be able to retire. They want the country safe, and they want the potholes fixed. And the rest of this stuff is a bunch of noise.
Yeah, right? Yeah, man. When you really break it down, right? That's it. Like, I don't want to break an axle on a pothole. That's
Yeah,
all. That's all I'm really looking for.
I am so proud to be an American. I'm never prouder to be an American than during the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games. If you watch the different countries come into the stadium, Japan walks in, they all look Japanese. You got Norway comes in, they all are blonde hair, blue eyes. Then you got America, bunch of mutts, man. You could give me the biggest redneck going, USA, we're number one. We just won the gold medal. Christy Yamaguchi. And I'm like, that's what I mean. I love that about America. When I lived in Los Angeles, I say you can go around the world in 80 minutes. And I think that's awesome. When is somebody going to figure out the strength of our country is our diversity? I mean, it just breaks my heart, all this division lately. I'm like, hey, we're all on the same side. We got to remember that.
Yeah.
That was the one thing out of 9/11 I loved, is for about 3 weeks, nobody flipped me off on the freeway. We were all Americans, and then people became rude to one another again. But gosh, folks, we need to learn how to be able to disagree without being disagreeable with one another. And that's what great leaders do. You and I know this. I like to, and both of us are serial entrepreneurs. It's essential to surround yourself with people with different points of view to get you thinking in different ways. And, I know you're a believer in that.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think when, unfortunately, also, in educating Americans, as you're saying, let's read, let's talk about the history, let's talk about where people came from, because diversity is all about different things. And I think when our country goes, oh, it's diversity, that means the color of our skin. Like, wait a minute, like, that's cultures you grew up, that's education levels, that's what monetary experiences you've had, like, or lack of. Like, there are all sorts of experiences we get from this. And I was kicked off a DEI panel one time, and because I was a white middle-aged man, and I was like, hey, I did win a world championship with like 25 men from like 13 different countries, speaking 8 different languages, and having everything in between with one common goal, right? And like, hey, whatever your stuff is from the background, like, bring it in, but let's stay focused on what's important for us as a team. And I think we need that leadership back to get us focused on, whatever those big 5 things are in America. If those are it, like, we do need to get focused on what's important, and the rest of it's kind of, just noise. And I'd love to see that, but let's dive into one thing. One thing that most people don't know about you, Dr. Danny, is that in your journalist days, you were working for the first President Bush back in the day, pretty young guy at that point.
Yep.
And you're like on the presidential circuit with, the man. Like, I mean, how old were you, and what was going through your mind? Like, I am covering the president of the United States right now.
Yeah, I was about 20 years old. I was pretty, we were talking beforehand. I didn't become a journalist because I wanted to be the next Charles Kuralt and do all these great special interest stories about cool, quirky people in America, kind of like the job Steve Hartman has for CBS Sunday Morning. He has like the dream job about the autistic kid that hits 7 3-pointers in the last 4 minutes of game. I love things like that. And instead they put me on the political beat. I'm like, oh, but it was great. I actually enjoyed it. And it was funny because I had my pick of any job, and an editor of a major newspaper, she offered me the city beat for $16,500 a year. Meanwhile, a friend told me, oh, they're hiring inner city teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, Trent, for the high pay.
Money. Right. Yeah. Well, I just appreciate that. I appreciate both those kind of tales as a young guy because I do think like people influence us, right, in the media. And I think there's not if anyone's ever sat and watched somebody and admired somebody, as a kid and a ball player, I really admired Ernie Harwell and then got the chance to meet him. Like that was a really cool experience when I
You tell
went.
me he's as cool in person as he
Oh
was.
my gosh. Like, yeah, nicest guy ever.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, you appreciate that voice. And my story with him was my first year with the Detroit Tigers, I signed late in 93. And so I didn't really meet Ernie. We went to off season. And then the first day of spring training, we're just getting ready to set up. And pitchers and catchers are about to report. And this is before cell phones, man. This is 1994. I worked for Sparky Anderson, right? Like, and I'm sitting at our breakfast table in Lakeland, Florida, at our cafeteria, and I hear this voice behind me. Hey, fella, you think I could have some breakfast with you? And I'm like, I know that voice. Oh, sure, Mr. Harwell. And I was like, oh man, this is so cool. I'm sitting there just probably permagrin my whole breakfast. I go through my whole day out on the ballpark. We run around, set things up, workouts, blah, blah, blah. And it's like 6:00 at night. And, one of those big moments for me and my dad were sitting at night, on a summer evening, when I'd come in at 9:00, 10:00 when the streets light and listen to the last 2 or 3 innings, the call from Ernie Harwell. Cause when I was a kid, wasn't on TV every day.
Yeah.
So I was like, Dad, I had breakfast with Ernie Harwell. it was like my thing, man. It was awesome.
And isn't that great? It's a great leadership lesson you just gave everybody is be that person. I always tell people one of the best experiences of my life was I'm a huge USC Trojan fan, and I was in Heritage Hall one day, and the football coach at the time was Pete Carroll, who wound up winning national championships, and he won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks. And I said hi to him, and he totally blew me off. And I always tell people that was the best experience of my life, and I'll tell you why, Trent. It taught me every encounter matters. That encounter meant nothing to him. It meant the world to me. The guy could be Mother Teresa. To me, he'll always be a jerk. He didn't know that I would become a speaker and tell that story to over 100,000 people. And so it shows you, like, it's those little things. And so I love that Ernie was that way with you. I'm a huge Dodger fan. I've met Vin Scully, and it's like there's like a halo above that guy. And again, you get these, you and I are from the same time period when my kids don't understand that at 11:59 at night, they used to play the national anthem and we lost television for 6 hours.
And the lights come up, right?
Oh yeah. And I don't think Tiger Stadium was as much like Dodger Stadium, but Vin Scully was so popular, people just held their radios next to their ears and you could hear it throughout the stadium because people wanted to hear Vin. He just had some of the greatest one of my favorite things was, a lot of people don't know, Vin Scully, his brother was blind. And so the reason he was so good at describing scenes is because his brother would give him feedback after the game. And I always remember that, who's Pedro Martinez, his brother Ramon Martinez. If you ever watched him pitch, he always stood up very straight. And the way Vin would describe it is, there goes Martinez in the windup, 6:00. And I'm like, oh, it's such a great visual. And there's something lost that we don't have those announcers anymore that just totally paint a picture for us. It's just wonderful stuff. So I love that. I'm so happy Ernie was as great as I hoped he would be.
No, totally great. I mean, just amazing. And I think the other guy that really stuck out for me when I was a kid was, and now the rest of the story.
Oh, Paul Harvey. Yeah.
I mean, Paul Harvey, he was so good. Like, and that had nothing to do with sports, right? And now it's so great. I pull his stuff up on YouTube to get me some daily motivation sometimes. Like, he says some things, and like, I'll be working out and throw me a 5-minute Paul Harvey dissertation on there, and I'll be like, dang, this guy's locked in, man. Like, this guy's locked in 1963, like It's so good. And I think that if kids are listening, there's somebody out there they want to emulate, right?
Yeah. Well, the Paul Harvey, I was just like you. I used to wait till 12:15 every day. He'd come on the radio. He's like, "I'm Paul Harvey," with the rest of the story. He passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 325 years old.
Yeah.
And when I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher in the school that had no tardy students because I always started off class with a Paul Harvey story, which are perfect 5-minute read alouds where he would describe something or something, and the whole time you're trying to figure out who it was. And actually, the last book I wrote, the Leadership Begins with Motivation book, is an homage to Paul Harvey because my kids love the Paul Harvey stories, but a lot of the people he's talking about are like Sears Roebuck. Well, kids today don't know who Sears Roebuck are. And so my book has stories of like Michael Jordan and Jeff Bezos and Sarah Blakely, people like that. But I was actually just at a school about a month ago in New York City. You'll like this one. Because a lot of people, this is from Paul Harvey. A lot of people don't know that New York City, before it was called New York City, it was called New Amsterdam because the Dutch settled there first. Well, back in 1664, the British were trying to take over the entire eastern seafront. And so they invaded New Amsterdam, and the Dutch surrendered without firing a shot. And so the British started making fun of the Dutch, and pretty soon everything negative in society became Dutch. And some of those expressions have lasted over 350 years in the English language. So, for example, when you go Dutch on a date, it means you're both paying. I'll be a Dutch man's uncle is not a nice thing to say to a person. A Dutch wife meant she was a prostitute. Dutch courage meant you were drunk. But there's one thing the British used to say to the Dutch, which infuriated them. You know how every ethnic group has a type of food we like to associate with that ethnic group? Well, the Dutch really like cheese. And so the British went around calling them John Cheese. And this infuriated the Dutch so much so that they started calling the British John Cheese in Dutch, Yankees, Yankees. And that
Hey, man, any kind of negative connotation to the Yankees, I'm for, actually. So, and it's funny because, my wife is Dutch, actually, and I live in a very prideful Dutch community in Grand Rapids and Holland, Michigan. And there's a tagline around here, too. If you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. And so like, that's a very prideful thing. And I'll tell you the one thing that I do really admire about the Dutch folks here is, a lot of folks came across in a very hard time, in a very hard time in World War II, and a lot of settlers, right, of the recency, of Dutch, right, and man, they literally preserved a 1940s community because they were so prideful of that community, which I got a kick out of because as you and I travel with business and speaking. I've gone to Amsterdam and I was like, by the way, that city's nothing like this anymore. Like, you have internet and mass transit and everything. It's pretty cool. Like, you should see it. No one rides bikes or ice skates anymore. All right. So
it's like Cinco de Mayo, how nobody in Mexico celebrates Cinco de Mayo. It's a Mexican-American holiday where
I had no idea that.
Actually, yeah, there's a great scene in Born in East LA. Cheech Marin's like, "Oh, it's Cinco de Mayo," and all the Mexican immigrants are like, "What's Cinco de Mayo?" He's like, "I don't know, but we have a parade every year."
All right, let's get into a little bit of Winners Find a Way. For our listeners, we talk a lot about leaders coming in and working through. If they've ever had a time they've been down and been challenged, and all the best leaders I know, and the 1%ers, they have absolutely been back against the wall at some point in their life, and not only went through it, over it, under it, however they could get around it, but they learned from it, right? They really took that away. So I love the quote, "Winners, when shown data that they are losing, find a way to win." Let's talk a little bit about your experience, Dr. Danny. I mean, you're a 14-year-old kid. You've lived in all these cultures. You're like, hey, I'm going to be on the speakers circuit speaking to 100,000 people a year. People are going to, I can see myself on the stage now, Mom, Dad, this is what I'm going to be, like I'll have a doctorate in education. I'm going to be a well-educated man, well-spoken. I'm going to be an author. Did you see that for you at 14?
Oh, goodness, no. Who sees that? I'll share two stories with you, Trent, and with the listeners. 2005, and this is a good lesson for all entrepreneurs listening in right now. So 2005, my wife, I was a professor at the time, and my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a complete scam, and it was run by a shyster. We lost everything, and I could focus on all the negatives, but I'm not that kind of person. I look at the positives. First of all, my wife is a saint. She's my mate for life. I put her through the ringer, and she stuck by me, which was amazing. Second of all, I no longer make money the end all be all, because I realize easy come, easy go. It can go that quickly. Third, I try not to judge other people anymore, because, you know, if I was somebody that looked at what I did, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize if you don't know everything about a person, you don't really know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, and I'm always embarrassed to say so, but the more I read my Bible, I realize I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And fifth was I didn't want to file for bankruptcy, which I eventually had to do because we had real estate in North Cuba, which is my name for Florida because there's no law in that state. But I didn't want to file bankruptcy, and my accountant said, well, you're going to have to make this much more money this year. And so I started speaking on the side, and I hit that number right on the number, Trent. Well, the next year he gave me a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. And so in year 3, I thought to myself, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically during one of the worst economic downturns in American history, I built up a speaking business, which has been so much better than if I had just stayed in education. So that's the first story to inspire all the entrepreneurs out there. I was actually just speaking recently, actually last week in Milwaukee, to small business owners. And I said, you ever notice that the people that say, enjoy the journey, have already succeeded? I mean, when you couldn't make rent, were you saying, gosh, I'm really enjoying this journey? I hate that advice, drives me nuts. But here's the other story I wanted to share. I was speaking I was in India back in, it was 2018, I was in India, and I was there visiting a bunch of schools. And I go into this one school, and the principal opens up the door, and there's 5,000 kids sitting there in an auditorium. There's like 20 TV stations. And the principal says, and now for the next hour, Dr. Brassell is going to share with us the 3 secrets to reading better. Holy cow, Trent, nobody told me I'm speaking. I have no such speech as that. Fortunately, English is a second language in India, and so I got to speak slower. So I looked at the kids and I said, hey, today I am going to teach you the 3 secrets to reading better. Who wants to learn the 3 secrets to reading better? The kids are going wild. And in my head, Trent, I'm thinking to myself, what the heck are the 3 secrets to reading better? And so basically, I went through the format that I train entrepreneurs how to use when they craft their presentations. I did that in my head, and on the spot, I came up with a speech, which eventually I formed into a company, which is one of my most profitable. I have the world's top reading engagement program. And so both of those stories are meant to inspire the entrepreneurs out there. You, me, and everybody listening, we're different people. Everybody else looks at the problems. We look at the opportunities. And, that's why I love the movie Rocky. Everybody loves Rocky. Why do you
Everybody loves Rocky?
Yeah, he gets knocked down. People forget he lost to Apollo Creed at the end of Rocky, but it's the best foreshadowing ever. It's the night before he plays, he's up against Apollo Creed. He's in bed with Adrian. He's like, Adrian, tomorrow I'm going to lose. But that doesn't matter to me. I just want to go the distance with the champ. And so even though he loses, the audience were like, no, he won, because his goal was to go the distance. And I always tell entrepreneurs, I'm like, there's no such thing as failure. There's just setbacks. You only fail if you give up. Like, keep on going. A lot of the most successful, you and I know these people. They just keep on figuring out a way. There's a great quote by Max Levchin. It's one of my favorite quotes. He's like, my first company totally bombed. I'm paraphrasing. He said it differently. So he's like, my first company, total bomb. My second one was a little bit better, but it still bombed. He's like, number 3 was kind of all right. We started doing all right. It's like number 4 almost didn't bomb. It still wasn't exactly where it needed to be, but it was on the right track. Number 5 was PayPal. Like, If it only takes 4 failures before you find a billion-dollar company, that's not so bad.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, I've heard that a couple of times with folks saying, "Hey, listen, it takes 9 companies to create that $100 million company. So, hey, listen, be thrilled that you've already failed 7. You're getting close."
That's right.
You know,
You're
and
right.
it's
You're right. I
yeah,
always love numbers like that, by the way, Trent. Who came up with that number? Where's the research?
yeah, right, right. I want to see the data. Well, it's interesting. A couple great things is like I think it's seeing opportunity. One of the things that I think that most people, as you describe that, is sometimes, opportunities always is kind of dressed up in work clothes, right? I mean, that's first that I think people really need to get is that, but you got forced into a radar that you maybe didn't know you had, but like you're like, hey man, I can't go into bankruptcy. So, hey, I've heard about these radar things that go up and you find out like what I'm looking for. I'm going to start keeping an eye on it, asking questions. And hey, why are you interested in that? Why do you want to know more about that? And can I give you that information? Like, wait a minute, I could do that. And so, but I think the challenge I hear a lot is that, people aren't even seeing opportunities right in front of them.
Yeah.
That's a real challenge for me. I would think the other thing that's interesting is, as you say, and this really kind of hit me when I hear a lot of people are like, oh yeah, the journey, man, enjoy the ride. Like, yeah. And I do a lot in mentorship, right? And I have this, in the entrepreneur organization, we have this picture in the deck where it shows a racing car driver. And then the guy standing outside the car and he's kind of giving the driver some instruction, and I'm like, hey, who do you think the mentor is in this? Because the mentor likes to tell the old mentee in the driver's seat, like, hey, listen, I don't want to go to the hairpin turn at 180, but like you should. And let me tell you how to do it because I've been there. I just don't want to get back in the car and hit the wall again,
Right.
But in the same breath, man, I have talked to a lot of successful athletes, entrepreneurs, and when you're a successful athlete, it's pretty tough to get 50,000 of your closest friends to come down at the park and while you walk your dog cheer for you, right? I mean, you're not going to get yourself in this environment again very often. So they miss the battle. I mean, yeah, it hurt and yeah, it was tough, but man, you knew you were alive, you were working for the greater goal. I mean, I think that's what they miss is like, I've kind of got some success, but I'm kind of bored.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do your folks tell you that? Because I know it's great hindsight information, enjoy the journey, because I wish I was kind of still on it, but what do you see in that?
Well, I agree. That's what I love about you with your baseball background. I mean, sports are wonderful at teaching you, mentorship for one. I mean, the veterans, the teams that are successful, it's the veterans are taking aside the young guys and saying, hey, you know what? I mean, that's one of the best stories ever. I know you're going to be offended because it's a New York Yankees story, and I'm not a Yankee fan either. I'm a Dodger fan. But my 11th grade English teacher, Miss McLean, she was a huge Yankees fan, and she always liked to remind us that in his final season as a Yankee, Joe DiMaggio was playing in a meaningless game. The Yankees already clinched the pennant. They're up a run. DiMaggio hits a single, tries to stretch it into a double, slides headfirst into second base, almost kills himself. And a rookie at the end of the innings like, Joe, what were you thinking? And DiMaggio looked at the rookie and said, I was thinking that some kid, this might be his first time at Yankee Stadium. I want him to know what kind of player I am. And Miss McLean, it was one of the best lessons anybody ever taught me. She said, Daniel, someday you're going to meet your creator. And let me tell you, it ain't going to be a very good day. So you need to make your worst day your best day by never giving anything less than your best effort. And that's such great advice for any entrepreneur, and it actually goes back even to that Pete Carroll story. He may have been having a bad day, but that lesson taught me you're not allowed a bad day, because his bad day became my story that I now tell people all the time.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that 24/7 leadership, because this is definitely a little different day, now, where when I was a kid, I think that even my dad, who owned a small business, was also a college professor. You go home, right? And who knows what happened at home, right? You could be a great person, great dad of the year. You could also be a drunk, abusive person, but it's kind of behind closed doors. And nowadays, like, hey, if you're a leader, you're on. I mean, people see you social media. They know who you are. They know when you're in that line in that checkout, you want to get all up in somebody's face about how the pricing's not right. You're not doing your job and act like a jerk at 11:30 at night at
Yeah.
the 7-Eleven. Like, people see that and they go, oh, let me record that real quick and see this guy. What a jerk this guy is. Oh, he's the CEO of what? Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a different environment now. Walk me through a little bit about, like, hey, as we're learning, what have you taught your leaders about that?
Well, John Wooden, the coach for UCLA basketball, won 10 national championships. He has the best lesson on that. He said, reputation is how others see you, character is who you really are. And so, you need to act like who you want to become. And people will reveal their true colors to you all the time. I mean, we both gave those examples with Ernie Hardwell and Vince Scully. Prince, I read a great story about Prince required that all of his singers and dancers had to always make sure they were dressed up whenever they were in public. And because he's like, you're a projection of me. Well, a good leader, to me, the best leaders, you don't have to be doing everything 24/7, but you have to have a vision and you have to convey that vision all the time. One of my favorite CEOs, I wish I had met him, was Herb Kelleher with Southwest Airlines. And the guy had fun. I see a lot of these leaders, and you see it in sports too. How many of your teammates actually looked like they were having fun? I always like the guys that, in baseball, I watch my favorite baseball player is Mookie Betts for the Dodgers. The guy is just a wonderful leader. He's a class act. He's just a great player, and he looks like he's having fun. You look at Chipper Jones from the old Atlanta Braves. The guy always looked like he was enjoying the game.
Yeah.
Some of these guys look so angry all the time. When you look in football, Brett Favre, the quarterback, he always looked like he gets sacked and he's sitting there joking around with the guy that sacked him. I'm like, wow, there's a guy that's enjoying the game. They're not taking it too seriously. And that's what I love. I learned this as a teacher. I take my job seriously. I don't take myself too seriously because I ain't all that, and neither are you. And if you think you're all that, teach kindergarten for 1 week. Those little ones will set you straight. I once had a little girl, LaShonda, raises her hand. I'm like, LaShonda, question. And she's like, Miss Brassell, when are you going to trim your nose hairs? I'm like, this afternoon. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, LaShonda. I ain't all that. And so Herb Kelleher, I looked at, there was a great story of one of his executives made a $10 million error. He took a risk on something and it cost the company $10 million. And so what did Herb Kelleher do to discipline him? He promoted him because he wanted to he sent a message to the entire company. I am not going to penalize you for taking risk in this company.
Yeah.
Who was it? It was Harry Truman who said, imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. There's so many people just waiting to do things. I want to surround myself. The best leaders I ever observed, they don't necessarily know every microscopic detail. They're usually actually telescopic people. They have the vision and they surround themselves with all those people that can do the job. I mean, you're in Michigan, Detroit, Henry Ford. That was the famous trial where they asked him, like, what was the capital of Michigan? And he's like, I have no idea. And they were trying to prove that he was insane. He's like, I don't need to know that information. I can press a button and I got 5 people that can tell me that information. My job is to come up with the vision. And I'm like, wow, what a powerful answer. He's absolutely right about that. Figure out what you want to get done and then surround yourself with people that you can trust and then let them do it. The best, Sparky Anderson was a fantastic manager because he made sure I got the best players in the world. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I know you know what to do. You don't need that huge pep talk because you know what to do. Tommy Lasorda, my favorite manager of all time, all of his stories were he got those guys laughing all the time. They were just, he's like, I know, and every other word was an F-bomb with Tommy, but it was, he knew how to lead men. And that's what, there's a great story in the David Marinus biography, When Pride Still Mattered, about Vince Lombardi. I love it because Paul Hornung was the best running back, most important player for the Packers, but he was in the war in Korea. And the Packers had a huge game coming up against the 49ers in San Francisco. Well, Lombardi, he used to coach at Army, so he actually knew General MacArthur. And so he called General MacArthur and said, I need Horning for this football game. And so he got 48-hour pass for Paul Horning. And Paul Horning, before the game, he has to give the pep talk to his teammates. He's like, guys, I came here for 2 reasons. One of them I took care of last night. Now let's go beat the 49ers. I'm like, that's fantastic. How do you not love this? Those are the leaders I want to be around. They enjoy themselves. They're having fun with the process. And they're also, by the way, they're underestimated all the time. Just because a person's smiling doesn't mean they're not brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I coached a couple players, we'd call them like red asses, right? Because they were just very serious. But it was hard for me as a coach, knowing different personalities. Like I never wanted to take that away from them because they had a bunch of success, man. Like, and if all of a sudden they were going to get loose and not be the tight, they knew how to be this. And when people try to loosen them up and they didn't have success, like they're going to go like, whoa, I can't ever do that. I got to have a 3-handed grip on the wheel. Like, I don't know how you're going to do it, but like, good luck with that, like, and so it's always a challenge to see how people find success. But I think, especially when you're playing this game and in the game of business, like I think we're all taking it pretty serious, except like, is it really that serious? Like it's fun and there's a way. So I want to talk a little bit about this because
right.
You talk about employee engagement, like reading and leadership, reading and success. I want to think a little bit more about like, how are we missing the engagement with our team members? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of leaders out there just goes right by.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the pandemic was a great lesson for a lot of leaders, Trent, is maybe you don't have to be at the office 24/7. Maybe by empowering our people to be able to work remotely so that they have time to go to their kids' Little League games, maybe that builds up a loyalty, which you don't see that kind of loyalty with many companies anymore. There's a reason that Google is always rated one of the best places to work. It's because they work those people like you wouldn't believe, 100-hour weeks, but it's free food. They have the chefs there. They've got the nap modules. They let you play volleyball, and they do all these things for their people because they're trying to say, hey, we respect you and we understand you have families. We're not penalizing you for a family. I love the story. I mean, again, I'm a proud Trojan. I love that Allison Felix, one of the best USC Trojans and one of the most decorated runners in American history. She won 11 medals, but when she got pregnant, Nike dropped her from their shoe. And so what did she do? She started her own shoe company, which is in direct competition with Nike and doing fantastic now. And I'm like, I love that. That's wonderful. That's an entrepreneur. Yeah. And you know what? I'm not going to let you get me down. The role of the leader, you said something which I just thought, man, that's fantastic, Trent, is when you were coaching, how you identified, well, this guy's intense, but I don't want to take that away from him. I'm like, wow, that's a good leader. That's absolutely a great leader. Phil Jackson, the reason he's the most successful NBA basketball coach of all time in terms of championships is because he made his 12th man feel just as important as Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. You look at Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, you couldn't get 2 more different human beings on a basketball team. Kobe Bryant wants to work out 24/7, and Shaquille's all about, being a big teddy bear and laughing all the time.
Yeah.
And Jackson was a good leader because he didn't want to take that away from either of them. He figured out, okay, here's how you guys work together for the common goal. And that's what good leaders do. Okay, here are my strengths. I'm sorry, I got all excited coming on today because I'm like, okay, I can actually finally give some sports analogies and stuff.
Right.
The movie Hoosiers is the same thing. The coach, Gene Hackman, Norman Dale, he at his first practice, he's like, I want to see what I've got. What do I've got? And I once had a coach, and I had won most improved player, and at the banquet, he said, some players you can yell at, some players you got to talk to. Danny, you got to talk to. And that made me laugh because some guys you can yell at, but then some guy, he did this to me at a game. He pointed at, he hit me with his finger on the chest, and I fouled out within 2 minutes because I just ran down every single person. I was so angry. And then he adapted. He's like, okay, that doesn't work with this guy. I mean, you know, some people on your team, they always want the pat on the back. Some people, they never want any kind of public recognition. Some people, you know, you need to kind of pump them up, and some people, they don't need that at all.
Yep.
And I really appreciate that you said that, Trent. The good leader identifies, well, what's the hand I've been dealt? True leader, anybody can change the cards. You know, the best leaders, they take the hand they're dealt and turn them into champions or winning hand.
Yeah, let's talk about the reading, the knowledge. I mean, how do you get people to read more?
Well, you do it based on their interests. So look at you and me. Neither of us had any interest in reading whatsoever. But the happiest day of my life was when I got my PhD. And my wife's like, why are you so happy? I'm like, because from now on, I can pick what I want to read. And that's what reading should be. I mean, you weren't a reader, but I guarantee you're reading everything that entrepreneurs are writing. You're reading biographies of successful people. You're reading leadership books and stuff. You know, very few people have a job in today's market where your boss is like, hey, Clark, I need you to read Pride and Prejudice by tomorrow. But that's what we're told to do in public school. I mean, when I was in high school, I was forced to read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And I'm not going to put it down. I know there's people that love that book. And basically, the story is about Hester Prynne commits adultery, so she's forced to wear an A on her chest. And I raised my hand, and I asked my teacher if I could wear a B on my chest because I was so bored reading that book. Well, why am I being forced to read that? Why is that any worse than reading Sports Illustrated, where some of the best writers in history actually wrote for Sports Illustrated?
Yeah.
And I'm actually an avid fan of that. You know, I'll read anything Russell Brunson writes because I'm like, oh, these are all kinds of great entrepreneurial secrets. I'm into any kind of behavioral psychology, behavioral economics. So I'll read Daniel Pink and Jonah Berger, Chip and Dan Heath. I mean, this is food for me. And that's what leaders do. I always call it intentional reading. So I'm working with a marketing guy right now on his presentation. And so we created a diet of intentional reading. I'm like, well, you need to read marketing books so you'll have anecdotes for your presentation. And I'll read a book now, Trent, where the book might stink, but if there's one anecdote that's good, it was worth my time. And so the book I showed him, the book was horrible. I hated the book, but there was one anecdote. It was about this marketer. He was going around the world trying to figure out the next $1 million idea. He's stuck in Chile, and he's watching these fishermen fish, and he notices that the fish they're catching, there's a different fish that they have to throw out, but he noticed that that's the fish that they would eat. And so he asked the fisherman, he's like, oh, are you eating that fish because they only pay you for this fish? And the guy's like, no, this fish is actually a lot tastier. He's like, oh, can I try it? And they're like, sure. So he starts eating it. And he's like, oh my gosh, this fish is so much better than the fish that you're catching. He's like, what's it called? And they're like, the toothfish. He's like, the toothfish? That is the worst name I have ever heard. And so he brought the toothfish to the United States, but he changed the name to Chilean sea bass. That's a great story. Give me stories like that all day long. So that's how you get people, it's also interesting too, especially a lot of leaders freak out. And I'm like, yeah, but a lot of the best leaders, they're not actually reading about leadership. I mean, presidents of the United States often to calm down their nerves, they read something light. So a lot of people forget that President Kennedy was once asked, well, what are you reading? And he says, well, to calm myself down, I'm reading this great series of books by this guy named Ian Fleming about this secret agent called James Bond. Because of that answer, MGM bought the rights to the James Bond series, and that's why we have the James Bond movies.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty awesome. So I'm always interested. You know, Warren Buffett. I always love Warren Buffett's just spending all day reading. He is one of my favorite quotes of any leader. People always think he's a man of integrity, and he always replies, well, we'll never know. And people are like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I was never 19 starving to death with a wife to feed. I'm like, wow, that's a very mature answer. It's kind of like you always hope that you're the person when the plane crashes in the river, you jump in to save people. And everybody says they will, but I'm like, well, will you? You don't know until it actually happens. So I like my reading diet. I mean, I'm an eclectic reader. I read all kinds of things. And here's the tip I want to give leaders. You and I were talking earlier, and you're like, oh, all these executives that read 50 books a year, how do you do that? And you gave a great answer. You listen to Audible books and book summaries and things like that. That's wonderful. Here's another tip I'll give people. I had read The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris, which is part of a trilogy about Teddy Roosevelt. It's a fantastic book. And in that book, it said by the time he was 30 years old, Teddy Roosevelt had read over 20,000 books. And so I'd say that to my kindergartners, like, whoa. And I'm like, okay, so we're going to read 10 books a day, kids. I mean, I read 10 books a day now. Many of them are scratch and snip and pop up, but I do read 10 books a day. Here's the tip for leaders is before I'm going to parties and business functions, I often go to the library or to Barnes and Noble. I'll go to the children's section. There's all kinds of picture books written about successful people. And instead of reading a 900-page biography, I'll read a 32-page picture book about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. And at that party, I can sound very intelligent and say, oh, it's like this person did. And people are like, wow, he's so well read. I'm reading picture books all the time. So there's the strategy for everybody out there. If you don't have time to read, go to the children's section. There's all kinds of great books out there.
Wow, I've never heard that suggestion, by the way. And I am an avid Blinkist fan, and the entrepreneur organization, they support us in that by getting us an account through our membership, which is a great partnership because, man, the time is the time, and I want those nuggets, right? And I also, I love the fact that John Wooden's got great stories and President Lincoln's story and what Ford had to say, but I can apply those principles to my own stories, right? And my own experiences, which I think have more landing sometimes when I'm telling them, right? And so getting that nugget is critical to me. I can remember reading one of the Covey stories. I'm like, I don't really care about the interaction with the pilot. What I really want to do is get to the whole point of the story and the moral of the story, the character, the ethic, the takeaway. And I can apply that in my life to an event. And I've been able to do that, and it's really helped me. But let's talk about reading and success. Why are some of the most successful people so well read?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's the $1 million question, Trent. I mean, there's plenty of readers that don't necessarily become effective leaders, but I've never read about an effective leader in any field who was not also an avid reader. You see it in politics. You see it, so the best politicians are very well-read people. Teddy Roosevelt reading 3 books a day. In business, Elon Musk, even today, running $4 billion companies, reads at least 1 book a day. He was fast. I just read a biography of him by Ashley Vance. And there were 2 stories in that book that were fascinating. One was that he was dating a new woman. And so he's at a Mexican restaurant with his biographer. And he says, I'm considering allocating 8.25 hours per week to her. Is that sufficient? I'm like, who talks like that? That's like Spock. And then the other story that was interesting was he was always asking questions on the floor to all of his SpaceX engineers. And they were getting kind of annoyed. They're like, hey, I already got this job. Why am I interviewing out all the time? But then they started talking to one another, and they're like, wait a second. His questions are getting more and more complex. We think that he's learning based on our answers, and we think he actually understands it better than we do now. I'm like, wow, that's how he's taking information. You look at, I could have kissed LeBron James when he was in his first NBA finals with the Miami Heat. They showed him in the locker room and he was reading The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I'm like, dude, you just did more for literacy with that picture than I'll do my entire life. That was fascinating. I mean, Bill Belichick, the coach of the New England Patriots, donated his football library, which was the most considerable collection of football-related books to his alma mater. In the military, you got like Storm and Norman Schwarzkopf, who I loved. They say he could read in 4 different languages and quote Shakespeare voraciously. One of my favorite books on you talk about Lincoln. I can read all day about Lincoln. I mean, Doris Kearns Goodwin, her book Team of Rivals. Oh, just phenomenal. Yeah,
phenomenal. That was one of the best reads I ever did. I was totally intimidated by that read, right? Because it's like 800 pages.
I know, right? It's a big book. Yeah, I mean that's about 750 more than I usually read. Yeah, so but that's what Lincoln was so good at, was he was always able. Even when he was a country lawyer, they said that people would come from 20 miles away to the pub just to listen to him tell stories by the fire, and during the darkest moments of the Civil War. And so they show one in the movie Lincoln, and they should have showed a lot more. But during tense moments, he'd have his cabinet, and to lighten the mood, he'd tell a story. And in the movie, the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, he's like, "Don't tell us another one of his stories." And he said, "Well," but he tells the story anyway. He's like, "Well, one of the founding fathers, Ethan Allen, when he was in Britain, trying to get a treaty signed, the British soldiers, they thought they would have some fun with him. And so they put up a painting of General Washington in the latrine. And so they were playing cards all night and feeding him lots of liquor and food and wait for him to have to do his business. And eventually he had to do his business. He went to the latrine and he came back, and the British soldiers were laughing. They're like, "Oh, did you see the painting of General Washington in the latrine?" He said, "Why, yes." And they were taken aback. They're like, "That didn't offend you?" He said, "No. Every American knows the sight of George Washington scares the crap out of the British. How do you not fall in love with a leader like that?"
Yeah,
I mean, that book was filled with just gems. Everybody should read that book.
yeah, that's yeah, I think it's so cool. Like, and I think there's also something to be said for when I finished The Team of Rivals. Like, I felt accomplished, right? Because, I mean, this is the only book that probably rivaled the Bible in size, right, that I'd ever seen.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
never read War and Peace. I haven't read that. Um, and man, that was one of those, like, it's a little intimidating, man. When you take something off the shelf and you need 2 hands to check it out, like,
Yeah.
that's no joke, right? And so
The
it's
two-hander. I like that. Two-hander.
yeah, it's a two-hander, man. And I think that that it's really cool that you and I share this love of libraries. I was just in Boston, Massachusetts, and working and doing an event, a retreat with a company that I was working with. And man, we drove to this great little place, and just to see this library that's, the place is probably, the building's probably 150 years old, right? And it's just like, man, that is just, I just wanted to go in and spend a half a day, like I can sit there and be like, this is just cool. I was a member of the Union League Club when I lived in Chicago.
Mm.
And so I love reading the old stories of, the Devil in the White City and these stories talking about, in 1890, we all met at the Union League to discuss the fair. You're like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Like, you mean the place I was just at for dinner? Like, it's
Amazing.
just the history behind it really, really says something. And man, we've created this great space for reading and knowledge. And 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 I'm also a huge fan of Good Will Hunting, minus the language maybe, but good story, right? The overcomer story of all time. And I'd love that story, hey, listen, it'll cost me, $12 in fines at the public library for a Harvard education, right?
That's
Like,
right.
it's all there. I can go get it anytime I want. Like, it's all available to me. And when I hear kids that feel like, oh, I'm limited, I'm not going to get educated, like, that's crazy.
Yeah, you already talked about it. Mentorship. I don't ever need to know Norman Vincent Peale, but he's a mentor to me because I've read his book. I didn't know Jesus, but he's a mentor to me because I read the book. He was a main character in the best-selling book of all time. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many great. I've actually never been to a Tony Robbins seminar, and people are like, "Why not?" I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know what the seminar is about because I've read his books.
Yeah.
Most people don't read the book. I mean,
Yeah.
Jack Canfield, his book, The Success Principles. After I read that book, I told my coach, because that's the other thing you and I believe in, is I believe you need good coaches to guide you along the way. And so even though you and I are coaches to others, we also employ coaches, invest in them for us. And so I had a coach, and he called me once. I was at the airport, and he's like, "Well, what's new in your world?" I'm like, "Oh, I just read The Success Principles by Jack Canfield." I mean, he just put a $25,000 coaching program in a $20 book. I mean, the stories are amazing. The research is incredible. The points are fantastic. I'm like, I would have paid $20 just for his bibliography. And my coach is like, "Oh, well," and I basically told him, I'm like, "I've made it my mission this year. I'm going to meet Jack because I'm so impressed by him." He says, "Well, come to my event in April because he's going to be there." Well, I actually had a speaking event in New York at the time. And it's the only time I've ever done this. I actually canceled that event for me just so I could meet Jack. And he was gracious. He was so great. I mean, he probably doesn't know me from anything, but it didn't matter because I was like, wow, I read your book. I know exactly what your mindset is. I know where you're going with it. Again, you don't have to, all these people investing all this. I'm like, go to the library. A lot of the free.
That's exactly it. I mean, that is so true, man. I mean, and I don't think that people always grasp that. Let's wrap with this. All right. Let's wrap with, people are out there. Things are getting tight. Things are getting tight. I mean, we've been through a pandemic. We've been through a lot of different things over these last times. If you talking to someone right now, they're in the middle of that rut. They're not doing well, down but not out. What would be your best advice to someone who's seen that data and they are not winning?
Yeah, I was blessed. I've been blessed throughout my life with a lot of wonderful mentors, Trent. One of them was Charlie Tremendous Jones. And Charlie said, "You're the same today as you will be in 5 years, except for two things: the people you meet and the books you read." So I always encourage people, surround yourself with people that are going to lift you up, and make sure you feed your mind with lots of wonderful knowledge. One of the best speakers I've ever seen, Keith Harrell, who unfortunately is no longer with us, he says that a lot of people say garbage in, garbage out. That's wrong. Garbage in, garbage stays. Somebody tells you enough negative stuff, you start to believe it. But it also, the opposite is true. You hear enough good things, you listen to this podcast enough and hear about people that are encouraging you all the time, that can stick in. And so that's what I tell people is stay the course. Don't ever give up. There's no such thing as failure until you give up. So stay the course. And I just really wanted to thank you for inviting me today, Trent. As a thank you to you and your audience, I wanted to give a couple of freebies. So if you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, again, freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to give everybody a complimentary e-copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. This is a book I wrote for a school principal who was trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation, demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. And I'm also going to give everybody access to a 5-day reading challenge I did online last summer for about 700 parents worldwide, where every day for a week for an hour, I'm going to give you all kinds of strategies to get your kids excited about reading, because the more excited you are to read.
Freegiftdanny.com.
What's that?
Free gift Danny.
Freegiftfromdanny.com.
From Danny.com.
Right now. Freegiftfromdanny.com. There you go. Freegiftfromdanny.com. And that's again just a thank you. The reason I do that is I think you and I had the same experience in school. I think schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, what goes to teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid go read. I want them to choose to do it because they love it. So just go to freegiftfromdanny.com. Those books and materials are applicable for all age levels.
For everybody, Dr. Danny Brassell. Danny, I'm going to end with knowledge has to be improved, challenged, and increased constantly, or it vanishes.
I love that.
Peter Drucker, my man, Peter Drucker, like, hey, listen, don't get stagnant. Like he's telling you, surround yourself with people that are going to lift you up, that are going to encourage you, that have done what you are trying to do, and they faced some adversity before, who will be your biggest cheerleader. And read, and read some more. There are plenty of things out there that are out there to tell you, hey, these are maps that you can just follow. Read and execute. So for everybody else, thank you for joining us on the Winners Find a Way show. Thrilled that you could be here today. Dr. Danny Brassell, not only here in the flesh, but also giving free gifts. Check it out. freegiftfromdanny.com. So thankful for everyone being here. Until next time, Winners Find a Way show every Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. Join us.